administration. In the meantime, Florida is part of an ongoing lawsuit against the Biden administration over its OSHA vaccine mandate, which has been put on hold pending the ongoing litigation. One America's Stefan Kleinhenz has more.
Mr. Governor, you just signed historic legislation that came out of the special legislative session. It came to your desk. I just want to start with, where did you decide to do this event? Where are we right now?
Well, we're in Brandon, Florida, which is in Hillsborough County in the heart of the Tampa Bay region. And this is, I think it's a city that's dedicated to freedom. So we're happy to be here.
We're in Let's Go Brandon, Florida. So, Mr. Governor, you signed this legislation into law. What message does this send to the Biden administration? But how does it show the difference between what you're doing here in Florida and what the president is doing in the White House?
Well, in Florida, our policy is nobody should be losing their job over these COVID jabs. That's a personal decision. But I don't want to see nurses, firefighters, truck drivers. I don't want to see those people cast out of work because of either a corporate or a government mandate. And if you think about it, these people have been working this whole time. These people have been working in hospitals. They've been keeping our streets safe. They've been delivering goods to market. Now, all of a sudden, they're going to get cast aside. That's just fundamentally wrong. And so we're the first state to provide really sweeping protections for people so that they're not terminated based off this.
Is this everything you wanted? Does the bill have everything that you hoped it would?
Yeah, look, I think that my bottom line was I want people to be able to keep their jobs. I don't want to see people being fired as a result of this. If you look at how they did it, they treated government entities a little bit differently. They treated private business. But, private business, they provided huge protections and a blanket ability to opt out. And so I think it was very effective the way it ended up being done. And I think it will likely withstand court challenges the way it was structured, whereas if you had done it another way, you may have given rise to a challenge. So I think the protections are strong, people won't lose their jobs, but I do think it'll stick in court.
So an interesting part of this, if an employee goes to their employer and says, I don't want to get the vaccine, one of the opt-outs is natural immunity. It seems like Florida's the first in the nation to recognize natural immunity as really an alternative to the vaccine. Speak to the importance of that and what trend or what precedent that could send for the nation.
Well, it's basic science that we're following. The OSHA rule, for example, rejected the idea of natural immunity, even though studies in Israel, Cleveland Clinic, you name it, have shown it is robust and it's long lasting. And so if you've recovered from COVID, you have a blanket exemption from any type of vaccine policies. And I think that that's the scientifically justifiable thing to do. And I can tell you, agencies like the CDC that will not acknowledge natural immunity, they hurt their own credibility a lot. And I think it's one of the reasons why most Americans now view them as more of a political institution than as a medical institution.
So now that you have signed the legislation, it's law, Florida law, we're now in a situation where perhaps federal mandates or federal law at some point could go up against Florida law on the issue of vaccine mandates. How do we expect that to go down?
Well, right now, the OSHA rule is stayed, and so nobody should be complying with the OSHA rule anyways. Now that we have our protections, they must comply with Florida law. They cannot do that. Now, if there's a court decision at some point that would say feds trump us, then we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But right now, you have the OSHA rule on hold, and you have a statute in place in the state of Florida that gives these protections.
So in a situation where a hospital, for example, or a corporation that isn't based in Florida but has offices in Florida is allowed to do a vaccine mandate in another state but is trying to do it in Florida, they're now in a position where that Florida office cannot comply. Is that correct?
That's correct. They have to respect the substantive protections that we've signed into law in the state of Florida. It doesn't matter where you're headquartered. If you're doing business here and you have Florida employees, then those protections apply.
I want to talk a little bit about the process. I know Dr. Joseph Ladapo, your new Surgeon General, is going to be instrumental in this process. If an employee goes, puts in the request, how does that process work with the health department, and can they trust that their employer isn't going to throw their request to the side?
Well, no. So it's automatic. So natural immunity, women of childbearing years, religious or ethical scruples, all of those are automatic. There'll be easy forms that people can sign and submit, and that's the end of it. We also, for private companies, also said, if someone doesn't want to claim any of those exemptions, they can just opt out and tell the employer, okay, I'll test, but you have to pay for it. And so I think the way it's structured is most employers are not going to want to go through being the vaccine police. and I think we've structured it so that the incentives are basically respect people's freedoms. So yes, there's going to be there. People can claim exemptions, but I think in reality, most are not going to have to, because I think that we've sent a clear signal to people in Florida. We want you to leave your employees alone in this regard. It's not appropriate to be firing them or really even worrying about it. Let them make these decisions, and I think that's what will probably end up shaking out.
Another part of this that you signed today is clarifying the Parents' Bill of Rights, adding to the Parents' Bill of Rights. What can parents in Florida expect now with this new legislation as far as masking children in school?
Well, we did an executive order based on the Parents' Bill of Rights at the beginning of the school year, and fortunately, almost all school districts complied. But we did have 10 that were rejecting that. They did their own thing. Some allowed, some opt out, some didn't. We've now basically peeled it all back. So kids are going to school and their parents are being respected, but this provides the substantive protection. If they force a kid to wear a mask, the parent can actually go and file a lawsuit, and then the school district has to pay for the attorney's fees and the costs associated with that. So there's really no incentive now for these districts to do it. Prior, with the Parents' Bill of Rights, the only enforcement mechanism we had was to take away the salaries of the elected school board members, but Biden was sending them money anyways, and so it wasn't an effective check. This will be an effective check, because you will actually be subject to litigation, discovery, all that. They're not going to want to go down that road, and so we looked at the data. I've never supported masking kids, but clearly the data shows unmasked schools have had huge declines in Florida, equal or above the declines you've seen in areas where you had masks. So let the kids breathe, let it be a parent's choice. Some parents want to send in masks, and we're not preventing that, but man, you can't force it on anybody.
You have mentioned the importance of litigating and legislating this legislation going to the holiday week. What level of comfort does that provide to Florida workers?
Well, I think it's great. I think there were impending deadlines. You had some people said in December they were going to get a pink slip. So this provides the protections. Businesses, if they start going down this road, every employee they do this to, they're going to get a $50,000 fine. And so that would be very significant for a lot of these companies. I don't think they're going to want to do it, especially with the OSHA rule being on hold. And we hope early December we'll get the federal contractor rule stayed in federal court in Florida, and we hope the CMS rule as well. So we're fighting on all fronts here.
Mr. Governor, thank you for joining us in Brandon, Florida.
Yeah, thank you.